And this will be a more difficult topic. Obviously, if you've seen any of my other more complicated Pals and Paws webinars, you know that I never like to show anything graphic or things that would be really disturbing to look at. However, the ideas and concepts that we're going to discuss, some of the treatment of the animals, is a disturbing thought in of itself. Because unfortunately, as we're about to get into, entertainment is kind of a loose term, and it doesn't always mean that the animals are enjoying the activity at hand. So just be prepared that we might be talking about some really heart wrenching things, but it is important to understand and be aware of so that we're not mistreating animals or using them for our sole amusement. So, like I mentioned, when we say animals and entertainment, that's kind of a loose term because it doesn't always mean that the animals are getting enjoyment or entertainment out of that activity. So, to entertain is to provide someone with amusement or enjoyment. So, usually that's a good thing. But like I mentioned, if the focus is only on the enjoyment of people, then it usually comes at the cost of not being fun or humane for the animals. So if the only focus is how the people react, is it a big spectacle? So there's lots of intense reactions by people. Is the focus solely on the money that the people might be making off of the animals' activities? Likely those types of things are going to come at the cost of the animals' health and welfare. So try to think about how something might be fun for one person or not another. So a very simple example would be like if your mom posted something embarrassing, like your baby pictures, on Facebook or online. So it might be fun for her and her friends, but it wouldn't be fun for you. But that's obviously a very simple example compared to animals being used for entertainment. It's not fun for them, and they have no choice and no voice in order to say that they don't want to participate or they don't want to be doing this. So it's extremely unfair and inhumane to use them for entertainment purposes, especially if it's compromising on animal welfare and well being. So, most of the ways that people use animals is not fun and probably does have some welfare concerns. If animals are made to do unnatural things, kept in poor conditions, or possibly even hurt or injured, so that they, do the activities that are desired by people, or if they don't do what the people want or expect, if any of that is involved, then it's clearly not a good or humane example of animals in entertainment. So the circus is probably one of the first ways that we use animals in entertainment that most people kind of think of. It's a traveling company, usually of acrobats, clowns, animals, various other types of entertainers. They give a very long and large performance, typically in a large tent. And they'll travel to a series of different locations. So they go all around the country to different states and major cities, and they're bringing, all of the entertainers, animals, their equipment with them. So you rarely see domesticated animals in circuses. Sometimes they might use horses, but really you usually see elephants, lions, tigers, or other large felines, bears, seals, giraffes. Because usually it's more of a spectacle and to show how grand and what a big thing to witness these animals making or doing these amazing tricks. That's kind of the point of using wild animals in circuses, is it draws a lot of mystery and attention, I guess. So most of the animals belong in the wild. They have wild instincts and wild behaviors. They belong in their specific habitat that their species is used to. And in circuses, the behaviors you see them perform, like if you look on the pictures here at the right, they're not natural to these species whatsoever. You obviously would never see a bear riding a bike or a scooter in the wild. Elephants, that looks like it's probably painful or at the very least very stressful for the animal to have to balance all of its weight on this tiny ball. So it's not a natural behavior by any means. They're trained with food, and sometimes this might be the only way they're fed. So the trainers might withhold food in order to get the animals to have a reason to try these behaviors, because that's the only way they're going to get fed. So that's obviously animal abuse and neglect. Uh, Most of the species used, like we mentioned, aside from being wild animals, they're large and dangerous. So the trainers might use harsh tools or weapons in order to control the animals, or, for self-defense if the animals decide to lash out, which wouldn't be uh, the animal's fault, in my opinion, because once again, they're being made to do unnatural behaviors. They're likely confined and stressed out, confused. So if they are using harsh tools like electric plods and bull hooks, that's going to stress the animal even more. So it's only natural for these animals to want to defend themselves and get out of these situations where they're extremely unhappy and mistreated. And since the circus travels to many different locations, most of the animals are kept in small metal or concrete cages that are pulled on trailers. So this is like an old-fashioned example, a vintage circus trailer, but modern ones actually aren't that different. It's usually just concrete with bars and put on top of a trailer so it can be easily wheeled or towed wherever the circus is going next. So they have very little room. There's no stimulation to keep them busy. They may only be let out while they are performing. So they really have no way to exercise or, display their natural behaviors to have any kind of outlet. So I'm sure you can imagine that's not a fun or fair existence for these animals. And then they're just forced to perform in front of people on top of it. So many circus animals show boredom and kind of depression in a way because they're not able to display their natural behaviors. So they become frustrated and basically can't cope with the situation that they're in. So, they might develop stereotypies, which are repetitive invariant behavior without any immediate or apparent function. Usually, it's resulting from an animal's repeated attempts to adapt to an environment, but unsuccessfully. So you'll see circus animals or even animals kept in captivity, like large cats kept as exotic pets, which is also never a good idea. They'll kind of just walk back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for hours. That's an example of a stereotypy. It's that repetitive behavior with really no cause or rhyme or reason. So social animals like elephants also face extreme isolation in circuses. Elephants form very close social bonds and tight-knit groups. So when they're separated from their friends or family, they really take it hard, and it can really cause negative mental impact and cause the elephants to really degrade in their health, even because they need that social interaction with other elephants. Circuses have a difficult time accessing the right veterinary care since they're always traveling. Wild animal veterinarians are usually stationed in one area and might not be widely available. Usually wild animal veterinarians work at like a zoo, an established zoo or aquarium, I should say. So it's not easy for the circus to just pop into a wild veterinarian. That it doesn't really work like it does with dog and cat veterinarians. So the animals might go for long periods of time without seeing a proper veterinarian or getting the right type of medical care. However, the culture around circuses is rapidly changing, especially in the past 10 years or so. In 2016, so only about 5 years ago, Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey retired the use of elephants in their circuses, which Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey are probably the biggest name in the circus industry. They've been around for over 100 years. They're extremely famous, so when they retired the use of elephants, it was a big, big deal. And they really did so out of public pressure and pressure from animal welfare organizations telling them that we don't want to see animals being used for entertainment in circuses. We know they're treated inhumanely. It's not good for them or their welfare. So luckily the public and the organizations did get Barnum and Bailey to change. However, the following year was the final tour, since this iconic circus, or that this iconic circus would ever have, because the ticket sales dropped due to not as many people interested in seeing the circus. So by them not showing elephants or using elephants in the circus anymore, there wasn't nearly the demand to go see the circus. So it's kind of interesting that many people seem to be drawn to the unnatural but impressive behaviors that these animals would display. Um, Otherwise, we would probably see more humane circuses like Cirque du Soleil, where they just do acrobatics. So there's nothing wrong with that type of circus, but I think it was very interesting to see that Barnum and Bailey did not make ticket sales after one season of not using animals. I think that says that the spectators should take a lot of the responsibility of why animals were used in the circus to begin with. So hopefully you guys are thinking about, should we use animals in circuses? Do you think that they get any type of enjoyment from having to display these unnatural behaviors or living in these conditions? Hopefully you kind of see that it's not really a great way for people to derive entertainment, not good welfare or well-being for the animals. So I think Ringling Brothers made the right decision, and hopefully we'll see the popularity of circuses continue to decline. And the rise of humane circuses continue to, like Cirque du Soleil, continue to exist. So zoos and aquariums are the next topic, and that can kind of be a multi-layered aspect to animals and entertainment. So zoos are an establishment that maintains a collection of wild animals, usually in like a park or a garden setting, but for the purposes of studying, conservation, or just to display and show off to the public. Aquariums are similar, but for aquatic organisms, and around 700 million people visit zoos and aquariums around the world every year. So there's a huge demand for people to visit these types of facilities year after year. I'm sure pretty much everyone watching this video has been to either a zoo and or aquarium in their lifetime. The first modern zoo was built in 1793 in Paris, and the first zoo in the United States was the Philadelphia Zoo, built in 1874. So zoos have been around for a very long time. However, what we think of as zoos is not what was built, in the 17 and 1800s. Early zoos were much different from today. The animals, if you look over here in this picture, were kept in fairly small, nothing but concrete cages, concrete bottom cages with metal bars. So there's not a lot of room, no stimulation or natural environment. It was pretty much just for the purpose of showing these animals off. So actually, a better name for them would be called a menagerie, or a collection of wild animals kept in captivity for exhibition. So early zoos, hundreds of years ago, really just wanted to show off these impressive wild animals. It was more about the luxury and the prestige of being able to own these animals, or for man to quote unquote control them. So this is what a menagerie would have looked like. But now, today, zoos have kind of evolved over time, and really there's lots of different types of zoos out there. So some, known as roadside zoos or wildlife parks, still function much more similar to menageries, where they attract people maybe by offering experiences where they can pet baby animals like tiger cubs or lions, bear cubs. So they advertise with billboards off of major highways, and they try to make it like a once in a lifetime experience, get up close to dangerous animals type of thing. And their focus is entirely on the entertainment purpose, and making money off of these animals. They don't emphasize education to the public or reinvest this money in research or stimulation for the animals. So roadside zoos and wildlife parks really do not treat the animals well. While they might have really interesting attractions like petting baby animals, the sole purpose is to make money. They want to draw in as many people as possible. They're not teaching animal welfare or conservation during the petting the baby animals or whatever type of event they attract people with. They really want to keep all that money for themselves. It doesn't go towards making naturalistic habitats for the animals or exhibits. Um, Really, they give the animals low-grade food a lot of the time. They might be kept in cramped and dirty cages, denied medical care because vet care can be expensive. So these facilities really want to keep as much profit as possible at the expense of the animals' welfare. So operate, once again, much more similar to menageries than what I consider zoos or aquariums. And roadside zoos and wildlife parks have very little oversight. Many states actually have fairly relaxed laws or might not have a way to enforce these laws. So the United States Department of Agriculture actually does license different roadside zoos and wildlife parks. However, they only have a handful number of people to inspect all of these different roadside zoos, wildlife parks, also breeding operations and farms. The same inspectors are required to see. So basically, there's only a few people for thousands, if not millions, of locations that need to be inspected. So there's no way to realistically enforce the laws if there are any. So fortunately, while roadside zoos and wildlife parks should be avoided, it really is up to the consumer or the everyday person to know the difference between a bad zoo or a roadside zoo and an established or well-maintained zoo or aquarium. So many zoos and aquariums really deeply care about these animals, and they want to help people understand the importance by educating the public and helping preserve these species, both in captivity and in the wild. So the AZA, or the Association, oh my goodness, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, was established to appoint a committee of professionals made up of mostly people who have worked at zoos and aquariums, other animal welfare experts that specify the practices for zoos and aquariums with the goal of improving animal care and welfare. So their standards are very rigorous, they're scientifically based and publicly available. So the whole idea is that if a zoo wants to become accredited by the AZA, they need to take very specific steps and care for their animals in a specific way, making sure that they're providing for their welfare and well-being, that the habitats are well maintained, people are trained for safety standards. Let's see, they examine the entire facility's operation. So they look at animal welfare, vet care, conservation in the wild. So they want there to be research going on at the zoos and aquariums to help these species not only in captivity but in the wild. They need a strong emphasis on education to guests as well as guest services to support people who are coming to visit the zoo or aquarium. Like I said, there's strong emphasis on safety for the trainers and the animals, uh, audiences, staffing, finance. So really the AZA has very, very strict requirements, lots of standards, but it proves that these facilities are doing everything they can to do what's right for the animals. So a zoo with the AZA accreditation, is top of the line. They're doing everything they can to make sure that these animals are living a beautiful life, or as beautiful of a life as possible in captivity and in the wild. So they currently provide accreditation and membership to zoos and aquariums that meet these requirements, and they actually have to reapply every 5 years. They complete a long application. There's multiple on-site inspections by the committee of professionals, and they conduct a hearing to decide at the end after the application and inspections are complete. So other agencies like OSHA, which is responsible for workplace safety, and the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, look to the AZA standards. So this really is kind of the gold standard in terms of judging whether a zoo or aquarium is housing and caring for their animals properly. Um, AZA accredited zoos and aquariums, kind of like I mentioned, have species survival plans and scientific advisory groups that focused on research for the conservation of these species in the wild. So not only are they making sure that the animals in that zoo are well cared for, but they want to maintain these species so that if their wild counterparts ever were to become endangered or go extinct, that we could have breeding programs in place or prevent them from going extinct in the first place. And fortunately, very lucky for us Chicagoans and Naperville residents, we have actually several AZA accredited zoos and aquariums close by us. So you'll see this is Brookfield Zoo up here. Lincoln Park Zoo is also AZA accredited. Costley Zoo, which is more local to Naperville, is AZA accredited and a wildlife rehabilitator. So they have native species that were rescued and not able to be released back into the wild. And John G. Shedd Aquarium downtown is also AZA accredited. So moving on to rodeos and bullfighting. So this is one of the more difficult sports or activities, animals and entertainment, for myself personally to understand, although it is popular in certain areas. So sometimes culture can impact where these types of entertainment or activities are being held, but basically rodeos are an exhibition or contest where cowboys show their skill at riding broncos, roping calves, wrestling steers, or other activities geared towards farm animals and livestock. So they use different types of farm animals. Mostly they're riding horses and roping or trying to control or ride, subdue the cattle. So the sport involves various activities where the cowboy must show off his skills by, like I mentioned, controlling or really subduing the animal that is the target. So some activities like bareback riding is just, riding a horse without a saddle, and that, is kind of different than calf roping, which can kind of be seen here. Saddle bronc riding, which is more similar to bareback riding, where the cowboy is trying to stay on a bronco that might be trying to buck him off. Steer wrestling, which you can see here. Team roping, barrel racing, and bull riding. So really bareback riding and saddle bronc riding are a little bit closer to, horseback riding sports or extreme types of horseback riding, whereas calf roping, steer wrestling, team roping, barrel racing, and bull riding is more what people think of when they hear the word rodeo. And we'll get into what each of these activities are. So calf roping and team roping. Calf roping is where just one person is targeting an animal, whereas team roping involves two men on horseback, and they chase the calf around the ring while on horseback, with the goal being to throw a rope around its neck and then knock it to the ground and tie it up as quick as possible. And team roping, once again, same thing, but there's two riders against one steer. So a full-grown castrated male cow, whereas calf roping is one person against a young cow or bull. And steer wrestling is where the horse riding cowboy, so they start off on a horse, ride up next to the steer and actually drop on top of the steer and to grab it by the horns and wrestle it to the ground. So they're pulling on its horns in order to make it to lose balance and then get it on the ground to win, quote unquote, by, showing their dominance or controlling it. I don't really know, but you can imagine that both of these activities are extremely terrifying for the animals involved. They're being dragged to the ground, roped unexpectedly while they're trying to escape for what they think is their lives. And steers, I'm sure it's pretty traumatic to basically be grabbed by the head and forced onto your back. So bull riding is probably the most iconic or well-known event at rodeos, or anyone who's been on a mechanical bull, kind of the same idea. The cowboy attempts to stay on the bucking bull's back as long as possible. However, the animals are often poked, prodded, and teased beforehand because they want to make it as much of a spectacle as possible. They want to make the bulls as agitated and active as they can so that they'll buck the cowboys off, or buck as much as possible and create, like I said, a large spectacle. um, so obviously the bull rider can easily get hurt, but in my humble opinion they got themselves into that situation. So I'm more concerned about the bull, in my humble opinion. But also the arena is very loud with cheering and screaming crowds. People might be throwing things at the animal. They're pretty intense events. They can find the animal. Obviously, it's not allowed to escape, so it can only really run in circles out of fear as this person tries to either stay on top of it or provoke it in different ways. And bullfighting is a little bit different. We don't see it here in the United States as it is illegal here and in many other countries, but it has been very historically popular in Spain and parts of Portugal. And when I say bullfighting, there are some forms of the sport that don't involve killing the bull at the end, but from here on out, when we talk about bullfighting, especially when we're referring to Spain and Portugal, where the bulk of this happens, is where it does result in the bull being killed at the end. So it's seen as actually more of an art form, and it's deeply ingrained into the culture of these areas, as well as being a multi-million-dollar industry employing tens of thousands of people, bringing in lots of tourists from all around the country. So that is really the main reason why people argue that bullfighting should be allowed in these countries, even though most of the world, many countries have made it completely illegal. Or, I was kind of seeing as I was doing research in France, they do have a form of bullfighting, but it doesn't involve killing the bull. So, really, in Spain and Portugal, it's because it's so ingrained into the culture, and you'll see it's done in a very specific manner. It's more of a ritual in these people's mind, so that's why this practice has persisted for such a long time. But bullfighting is what we call a blood sport, and it involves weakening and provoking the bull beforehand, and then killing the bull in a very specific ritualized manner. So before the fight begins, the bull might be stressed from being transported long distances. Usually they're branded, and for anyone who doesn't know what branding is, it's usually using a burning hot iron to mark the animal. Because it's burning hot, it will leave a burn scar in whatever shape the iron is. So there's 3 stages in a bullfight. It begins by the matador taunting the bull with colored capes and moving aside at the very last second, because the goal is to try and impress the spectators by risking their life and being able to avoid the bull coming at them at the very last second. So usually they're not using the red cape here. It might be pink or purple, gold, but really it doesn't matter what color it is, because bulls are colorblind, to red at least, and their defenses are set off by the movement of the capes. So it has nothing to do with the actual colors. That's more just for the spectators and the show, but they are taunting the bull by waving the capes because Bulls' defenses are set off whenever they see movement. They think, it might be something coming to threaten them. So that's why they will lunge and attack. And the matadors are basically exploiting this with the capes. So picadors are the next stage of the bullfight, and they're on horseback but wear protective armor and use lances. So they kind of ride out on horseback. The horses might have some kind of protective covering, but really the most protective armor is on the picadors. They taunt the bull as well and actually stab it in the shoulders whenever it comes close while charging. So sometimes the horses are injured by the bull's horns because the bull is trying to defend themselves and, attack the rider who is stabbing them. But the riders, really don't face too much injury because of their protection. So it's really the bull and the horses dealing with most of the injuries. And then another group called the bandilleros, or I hope I'm saying that correctly, throw colored darts at the bull to weaken it even further. So it starts with a taunting stage, then they start to weaken it by driving sharp objects into the shoulders and back, and then the final stage is where the matador comes back out with the red cape this time, but also with a sword, which you can kind of see down here. And the goal, or the idea, is that this sword needs to be stabbed in the bull's back when it makes its last lunge of defense towards the matador. So this is, once again, all very ritualized. It's supposed to be done in this specific manner. However, it's not a clean death. So while it might subdue the bull, sometimes an assistant actually has to come out and quote unquote finish the job, as the animal just waits there in agony, unable to do anything else. So once the match is done, the bull's body is dragged out by a pack of horses, and the matador gets to take a victory lap. So while bullfighting like this is not seen in the United States, like I mentioned, it's a multi-million-dollar industry, mainly due to the tourism from people from other countries coming to see this. The running of the bulls, let's see. Yeah, the running of the bulls is a little bit different. That's where the bulls are chasing people, and masses of people run in front of them and try to avoid getting stampeded for some reason. But the running of the bulls actually ends in a bullfight. The bulls are led into the bull ring after I want to say 8-day festival, whatever it is. So really, most of these activities are all surrounding bullfighting, and it always ends in the animal being killed, unfortunately. So, like I said, very difficult topics, but tourists make up a large part of this industry. So even though we might not be conducting these activities in the United States, it doesn't mean that we're not still partially responsible. So if you ever have the opportunity to see a bullfight or travel to Spain during the running of the bulls, do not support this industry because, as you can tell, it's a pretty disturbing, awful thought to see that these kinds of sports and quote unquote entertainment still exist. So, not to keep going on the dreary and awfulness, but it is important to understand the full scope of animal fighting and blood sports. So, animal fighting has been present in the United States, even though we don't see bullfighting really, but it originated with bear baiting back when the country was first becoming colonized, by England back in, the 1700s or even earlier. So, bear baiting involves a bear being tied up and then pitted against a pack of dogs that, torment and try to attack the bear. The bear will, attack and defend itself back. So, one way or another, it usually results in injury and or death to both the bear and, dog or dogs. And while you would think that this has long gone away from the United States, it is illegal, but there was a ring found in 2010, so only about 10, 11 years ago in South Carolina. So unfortunately, some people might still practice this awful blood sport. but it's not as widespread as cockfighting. That's another centuries old blood sport where two roosters, or referred to as gamecocks, are bred for fighting and placed in a small ring where they have no option really but to fight to the death. Um, so the spectators and quote unquote breeders make money from gambling and entry fees. So they charge money to come and see the sport, and then people are making bets on which animal will win or not die, I guess. And that's supposed to be fun. So even if a bird survives, they usually face injuries such as broken bones, punctured lungs, pierced eyes, and if they cannot fight again, then they're useless to their quote unquote breeders and likely will unfortunately be killed. Some people even use gaffs, which you can kind of see here. They're 3-inch long blades, and that'll help the rooster as they're fighting do more damage by cutting up, the other rooster involved. But gaffs are so deadly that roosters have even killed the spectators or handlers when they go to pick them up and they have gaffs on. Because basically, when roosters fight, one of the main ways that they do that is by kicking at the other animal or the person provoking them. So it can be, and they thrash their legs very quickly. So if you have a 3-inch long blade on 2 legs, coming at you really quickly, that could really do a lot of damage very quickly to an animal or a person. Sometimes the handlers might provoke the birds or give them substances to make them even more aggressive or unpredictable. So while it's illegal to hold a cockfight in any state in the United States, it is only a felony in 42 states. So some states don't even punish spectators. So you basically get a slap on the wrist for attending or even holding and planning a cockfight. And dogfighting, some people might be a little bit more aware of, but very similar to cockfighting. It's a blood sport, pitting 2 animals against each other, and it has a long history in the world as well as the United States. So it involves, oh, and one more thing, I'm sorry to backtrack, with cockfighting and dogfighting as well. These animals I kind of mentioned don't have a choice. While I'm saying that they are bred for fighting, really what that means is the handlers are selecting the animals that are the most fearful or most able to be provoked, and they are placing them in a ring where the animals have no other option. There's no escape. They can't get out of the ring. And roosters especially, their instincts, because they're territorial, is sometimes to defend their territory. But the ring is conducted in a way where these animals fight unnaturally in a way that we would never see in nature or on farms. If 2 roosters on a farm get into an issue or are defending their territory, usually it just lasts for a couple of seconds and they sort it out. They go their separate ways. Animals rarely fight to the death in this manner. They are bred by selecting for fear and forced by placed in a small enclosed ring where they have no other option but to fight. So hopefully that kind of clarified things. But like I mentioned, similar to cockfighting, dogfighting just uses 2 dogs, but same idea where the goal, unfortunately, is to fight to the death. And the sole purpose is just for gambling, profit, and these people's entertainment, if you could even call it that. While dogfighters claim that these animals have been bred, once again, that they want to fight, what really this means is that they selected for the most fearful and defensive animals. So they're subjecting them to awful, quote-unquote, training methods that really are just abuse and mistreatment, starting early on in puppyhood, because they want to encourage and reinforce aggressive behaviors. So they'll mistreat the animal so that it will have a defensive response and actually encourage that defensive response towards other animals. Dog fighters often keep several dogs as well, which a lot of people might not realize. But the idea behind this is they might be losing a dog in the ring every so often, so they need a replacement in case one gets killed or injured. And the dogs are usually kept permanently outside with very heavy chains to prevent escape. So you can kind of see in this picture, there's multiple dogs and they have very small little houses. Sometimes it's just a hollowed out barrel, low quality food, obviously, because the idea is to make money. They're not going to spend money on care, and the animals, aren't able to reach each other. They're just kept on long enough chains where they can kind of walk around and go inside their little shanty of a house, I guess. Um, so some animals or other dogs might be used as bait or practice. So dog fighters will bring random animals for the dogs to practice on and kill, which is pretty awful and inhumane. In addition to thinking of ever doing a blood sport, but like I said, it's very hard to wrap your head around these things, unfortunately. Um, but oops, the dogs used in fighting faced obviously horrendous, unspeakable injuries sometimes, uh, like broken bones, deep puncture wounds from being bitten, heavy and sometimes internal bruising, blood loss, shock, and exhaustion, just to name a few things that could have to happen. Injuries are usually so bad that severe infections may result or further complications down the line. Dog fighters, though, will either ignore the injuries or barely treat the injuries themselves. They're never going to take the animal to a veterinarian because that would likely lead to them getting caught by the police or being reported for animal abuse. So they're not going to treat any injury. Like I said, they might try to do something themselves if they think that the animal is able to fight after they recover from the injury. But similar to cockfighting and a lot of animals in entertainment, if they're not able to be used in that form of entertainment, or if the dog can't fight, they'll euthanize it or kill it because they see it as useless now. So, aside from being one of the most inhumane actions towards animals, dogfighting hosts other criminal activity or draws in other types of crimes, such as drug dealing, selling, weapons and firearms, and even gang initiation. So, law enforcement, whenever they've raided dogfighting rings, they see that there's a lot of other crimes going on, not just illegal gambling and animal abuse. Sometimes they've even seen young children are brought along by their families. Believe it or not, this can be a family event for some reason. People would do that. And that's awful for the children who, might not understand what they're being exposed to. And this might have a lasting impact on the child's view towards violence, disrespect for the law, and animal suffering. So, dogfighting really uh, changed, or society changed the way it viewed dogfighting or thought about dogfighting in 2007. Like, if you were born after 2007 or are unaware of the Michael Vick case, then I know when I was younger, you kind of have a certain image of what someone who fights dogs would look like. Like, we all kind of assume, oh, only this type of person would be involved in dog fighting, but that's not the case whatsoever. And most people will never see or hear about a dog fighting ring in their community in their lifetime. However, that doesn't mean that those dog fighting rings don't exist. So a lot of this happens, behind closed doors. It's highly secretive because they don't want to get caught. So when in 2007, there was a very famous case involving Michael Vick, who was the quarterback for the Atlanta Falcons. And they found out that he was involved in a very in-depth and highly expensive dogfighting ring that he actually started with three other associates. So, around the same time, he began his rookie year of professional football in 2001. They purchased the property and created Bad News Kennels in Virginia, where Vic is from. So, him and his three associates began quote unquote testing and breeding dogs for fighting. They would kill any quote unquote poor performers because, like I mentioned, any animal that can't fight or isn't good at fighting is useless to these people. And they began growing their ring and ended up with around 50 dogs, 50 fighting dogs by 2007. So this all went on for, 2001 to 2007, about 6 years, with not many people being aware of it. And Michael Vick really was becoming one of the best football players in the NFL at the time. He was really getting a lot of fame and accolades. He signed a big deal and became the highest paid NFL player by 2006, or in 2006. So, likely this operation wouldn't have been discovered. It was kind of by mistake when Michael Vick's cousin was arrested for an unrelated crime, but he just happened to use Michael Vick's address when he was arrested. So the police were searching the property related to that crime, but discovered evidence of dogfighting, and this provided probable cause for them to get another warrant. So then, when they came back a second time, they found 54 dogs in awful conditions and several inhumane items that dog fighters use to quote unquote breed or quote unquote train fight dogs. And I won't even get into the inhumane items because it's that sickening. One example is using a brake or parting stick when the dogs are fighting if they have to pry their mouths open. So if that's the one that I was okay including in the PowerPoint, I'm sure you can imagine how cruel some of these other items or paraphernalia had to have been. Um, Michael Vick initially said he was innocent and claimed that he didn't have involvement, that he had never been to this property, but a federal investigation was launched, which is actually highly unusual in dogfighting cases. The Michael Vick case kind of changed everything, like I said, in how society sees dogfighting because no one with this high of a profile had ever been found to be involved in something like this before. And usually it was a simple state or county investigation. It's rare that the federal authorities would get involved in something like this. But after 4 different searches, Vic and the 3 associates were all indicted on felony charges of animal fighting as well as illegal interstate commerce, which was because the dogs and some of the spectators had traveled, through state lines. And actually, the interstate commerce charge has a maximum of 5 years in prison, while the animal fighting violation only carries a maximum of 1 year per violation. So it's a harsher crime to illegally move things around over state lines than it is to fight dogs against each other. Just interesting fact that the more punishable crime has nothing to do with violence, just more the act of conspiracy and creating this crime ring. So, dogfighting is a felony in all 50 states, but often first-time offenders don't receive jail time. The prosecutor for the Michael Vick case implemented a special provision as Vick and his associates' actions were deemed especially heinous, cruel, and inhumane. So they basically said that these people, Vic and his associates, deserved to be punished more harshly because what they were doing was so much worse than the average dogfighting ring. I mean, all dogfighting rings are bad, but they were making lots and lots of money. As you'll see in a minute, Vic already had unfathomable amounts of money due to his success in the NFL. They were pretty awful in their treatment towards the dogs. Obviously, they're fighting them, but the ways they disposed of dogs that were useless to them is pretty disturbing, so I can see why the prosecutor felt that they deserved extra punishment for the specifics of this crime. And it took a really long time the four and the three other people involved to admit the extent of what they had done. So Vic ended up being sentenced to 23 months, which would include 3 years of probation afterwards, where he would not be able to buy, sell, or own dogs. 3 years sounds like nothing to me, based on what he did. He was fined around $5,000 and had to pay $928,000 in restitution. So just, a little under $1 million for all that was said and done. And keep in mind that Michael Vick had a very, very, very successful football career, and actually, you'll see, pretty much still does. Um, if he had been signed for a 10-year, $130 million contract. So, $1 million out of $13 million a year for 10 years really isn't anything, in my opinion. But this was the biggest punishment for anyone who had been found to be involved with dogfighting. So it is a step in the right direction, but I personally don't feel that the punishment fits the crime. He was suspended from the NFL while all of this was going on. They suspended him without pay, but he was allowed back into the NFL as of 2009 with the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm pretty sure that's who he still plays for. So for, what was it, 2007 to 2009, he didn't get to play in his professional sport and didn't make money for 2 years when he had 50 dogs on his property being treated horrendously. Fair. You can tell how much this gets my blood boiling, but yeah, Vic only served 18 months out of the 23-month sentence, and his co-conspirators were sentenced between 2 to 21 months, depending on their specific involvement. So while, once again, this was the most anyone had really been punished for dogfighting, especially in the public eye, it really makes you think that, they got away with such heinous crimes and did less than 2 years in jail. And Michael Vick was able to start working in the NFL after 2 years. However, another good improvement, aside from, really showing the public that anybody can be involved in this type of thing, and that the punishment for dogfighting should be more severe. This was the first instance where the dogs were actually rehabilitated afterward. In most dogfighting cases, or pretty much all dogfighting cases beforehand, the dogs were euthanized after being, taken out of the ring because they were believed to be too dangerous. But partially, because it was such a high-profile case, the public was appalled, and they I kind of remember, I was fairly young at the time, but everyone was talking about it. People couldn't believe that someone so famous was involved in such an awful and bloody crime. So it really opened people's eyes. People fell in love with the dogs, obviously. They did not want them to be euthanized. So they kind of took a team of a few different animal welfare organizations and animal behaviorists, but they were appointed to evaluate these dogs and recommend whether they should be adopted, trained as possibly like police dogs, placed in lifetime sanctuaries, or, if they were too far gone and euthanasia really was the only option for them. And that was actually the case for only 1 out of 49 of the dogs that were rescued from the bad news kennels. Only one. It showed such extreme aggression that euthanasia probably was the best course of action. If the animal is a danger to itself and others, it probably isn't going to have a high quality of life. It's not able to enjoy things like normal. So I think, that's why for that one dog, they believed that was the most humane option. But the other 48 dogs, while they might have had lasting effects, different degrees of either mental or physical permanent damage, they were able to be successfully placed in lifetime sanctuaries or rescues. I think there were like 8 different rescues that took them in, some other specific places that had a place where these animals would be safe from each other and given the things that they need to live out their lives. So that's what a lifetime sanctuary is. But most of the dogs, I think, were actually adopted. Might have had some rehabilitation in between the time that they were rescued to the time of adoption, but you can see a picture of lots of the dogs that came from Bad News Kennels up here. And actually, one was used on the cover of Sports Illustrated in 2008. So, at least that changed for the good, that we now understand that dogs used in dog fighting aren't all the same. We need to evaluate them as a case-by-case basis. Some might just not be able to live around other animals. Some, unfortunately might live such awful existences where euthanasia is the only way for them to have any peace. But most can live, fairly normal lives after they're rescued and rehabilitated. And they do deserve a second chance. They don't want to fight. This was done to them. So I apologize for taking a long time. This is a very in-depth topic, but we just have a few more examples of animals in entertainment. So horse racing is one of the most expensive sports and industries in the United States. Many people are probably aware of the Kentucky Derby. There's a picture down here. Very famous and expensive event held every year since 1875. So it's a long historical sport in the United States. And the Kentucky Derby is the largest horse race in the U.S. The first place prize is $1,000,000, but obviously that goes to the owner of the horse, not the horse or the jockey who rides it. So really, the industry is all about breeding the horses and who owns the horses. That's where most of the money is. Tickets to attend the Kentucky Derby usually start around $80 each for the general admission seating. So that's like way up in the stands back there. I'm sure some of these seats or the deluxe seating are, several hundred to maybe even thousands of dollars. It's a very, very expensive and prestigious event. And there isn't anything necessarily inhumane about letting horses run or race. It's more the conditions that the animals might live in due to the racing lifestyle that's inhumane. So the animals really don't get a choice whether they're racing or not. Often they're kind of forced into it by their owners who want to make the money through breeding or through winning the prizes. Breeding the horses is a very lucrative business. So people will pay to have, female horses bred, or they might pay for the, DNA or sperm of male horses. And I'm talking, once again, hundreds to thousands of dollars. So it is a very expensive and lucrative business. If a horse is injured or unable to race, though, this isn't always the case, but sometimes they might be euthanized if they're seen as useless. Racing horses normally live in smaller stables or trailers where they're, traveling constantly between races or competitions. So they might not receive much stimulation other than racing or, practicing and exercising for racing. So they're not getting a lot of, outside time to just walk or bond with their handlers. It's pretty much all of the resources are directed towards improving their racing ability. And while it's not common, some people might use performance enhancing drugs or steroids on the horses to try and give them an advantage, since the prize money is desirable, and if a horse wins competitions, that makes breeding that horse more expensive and more desirable. So there's a high incentive for people to try and get their horses to win competitions, because it's just going to result in more and more money. There's other types of sports that are done on horseback. Um, there's a, we'll get into it, but a hunter jumper is one example. That's what a lot of people think of. Or if you've learned horseback riding or taken horseback riding, you're probably familiar with hunter jumper, reining, show jumping, vaulting, dressage. So these are all different types of sports. Vaulting is where the rider actually tries to like jump over, via pole vault, I'm pretty sure. They're very detailed and impressive. Reining, I think, involves going around tight turns and focuses on the ability to like steer the horse. And dressage, which we'll talk about in a minute, is how gracefully and pretty the horse is able to walk. Since there's actually several ways or gaits, technically, that a horse can walk, dressage is really focused on that and the spectacle of how beautiful it can look to ride a horse. So, how the animals are trained and treated really is what determines whether it's humane. So, most people who ride horses or, riders, love the horses themselves. They're passionate about this for a reason, and they probably grew up with horses. But it's the industry, I would say, that focuses on the money at the expense of animal welfare. So they're the ones driving, that this should be a very lucrative business. They want, riders to continue to push the bill so that they can keep making more and more money year after year. So dressage is kind of a good example of this. The sport can be done humanely, since really all it is scoring how gracefully the horse can move. But unfortunately, this has kind of resulted in some awful methods being used by certain handlers to train the horses into a more pronounced walk. So not everyone involved in dressage does this, and it is banned by different groups that organize horse racing and sporting events, but unfortunately some riders or handlers might still try these methods because it does result in a more pronounced and emphasized walk that typically is scored higher at the event, because dressage is about exaggerated movements and how the animal is walking. So rollkur, you can see kind of here, is using excessive force to hyperflex a horse's neck. So it's actually tied and constrained so that it gets an extreme angle. And the horse, when it's untied and is performing dressage in the competition, will have a very specific look in the way that it's holding its head. And those horses that have had this done apparently are more likely to get scored higher or win the competition. Soaring is the use of chemicals or mechanical devices in order to cause pain in the front legs and feet. So sometimes they drive nails into the horse's hoof, or they'll use caustic, chemicals that cause burning and discomfort. So the horse will pick their feet up higher and faster than normal. So, when the horses are walking during dressage, they're trying to pick their hooves up as high as possible and fast and in a specific way. So, once again, not everyone in dressage uses these two methods, but if people are so focused on winning and entertaining audiences and making money, then they're going to be more likely to use awful methods like this. Whereas if, someone's doing a horsing event for the fun and because they love horses, they're most likely not going to be using this type of method to train their horse. So it's really how the animal is trained and treated is what determines if it's inhumane or not. So greyhounds are also raced, and for anyone who doesn't know, greyhounds are the fastest breed of dog in the world. They're a type of sight hound, which are known for seeing far distances up to 1,000 meters away. Greyhounds were most likely originally bred for hunting purposes way back in ancient times. There's actually even, pictures of them in ancient temples and, in Egyptian hieroglyphs and stuff like that. They've been a dog breed and close to humans for a very long time. And eventually, the sport kind of developed out of coursing, which was popular in Western culture and involved a greyhound or another type of hunting dog that would chase a live animal. So often like a rabbit or maybe a cat that they would let loose on this course, and the greyhound or hunting dog would chase them in a circle. And spectators would attend and supposedly enjoy the thrill of the chase, watching these dogs run very quickly after live prey. Um, but then eventually the live animal was just replaced by a mechanical lure or artificial hair. And this is the same idea. It mimics a live animal lure. You can kind of see it in a picture here. It's just, usually a little blob or a stuffed animal, kind of like a rabbit type of thing, but it attracts, it's moving in front of where the greyhounds are running. So, the greyhounds are running after it and keeps them focused on the race at hand. Similar to horse racing, the greyhounds are kept in confined cages, so you can kind of see them in really small cages up here. That's like half the size of our dog kennels. And greyhounds are large dogs. They're skinny, but they're very tall and very long. So they do not have much room at all when you consider that these are small kennels in general, and this is a fairly large-sized dog cramped inside of it. But they are kept in these cages and probably given poor quality food and care in order to save money. The greyhound racing track wants to keep all of the money or profit as possible. So when the dogs cannot race or become too old to race anymore, they're no use to the track. Sometimes they were dumped in the past, but as greyhound racing becomes less popular and more states ban it and outlaw it, we've definitely seen the rise of greyhound rescues and greyhound retirement rescues. So people will take these greyhounds out of greyhound racing or rescue ones that are coming close to retirement and help put them into homes or get them adopted out. But as you guys know, there's already so many dogs and cats in animal shelters across the country. So using greyhounds for racing just to then not have a plan and kind of throw them onto animal shelters and rescue groups that are probably already overwhelmed with the number of pets waiting for homes is not the most ethical practice. But, greyhound rescue groups do a great job. They're amazing, but it's just unfortunate that this is born out of people's need to be entertained, that it's adding to the pet overpopulation problem. And due to the inhumane way that greyhounds are kept, like I kind of mentioned, greyhound racing really has decreased in popularity, and it's illegal in 40 states as of 2020. Arkansas, Iowa, Texas, and West Virginia all still have tracks, but they are two are non-operational. So I think only two still might have attendees. Um, Iowa and Arkansas, I'm pretty sure, are the ones that are shutting down their tracks right now and will be phased out in the next couple of years. However, Alabama, Connecticut, Kansas, Oregon, and Wisconsin, while they phased their tracks out, they did not make greyhound racing illegal. It is still legal in these states. And actually, I saw a greyhound race when I was very young up in Wisconsin. I went to the track that was there, and back then in the late 1990s, people didn't realize yet how awful this spectator sport was. But it's once again all about gambling and betting on the animals. And they're kept in really awful conditions. So as this was brought to light, people campaigned for these tracks to be closed down, but hopefully these states will still change their laws as, it doesn't prevent down the line somebody else from opening up another greyhound racing track. But luckily, most people are not interested. They know that it's not a humane thing to go and watch anymore. But there are plenty of great ways to, be entertained by animals while entertaining them in return. So if the activity includes being fun and geared towards both the animal and humans' entertainment, the focus isn't on money or just solely what the people want, then it is a humane activity and a good example of animals and entertainment. So there's definitely an endless list, but some popular or common examples might be like dog agility. This is using positive reinforcement training methods. These dogs are pets, so they're kept, in wonderful homes with their families, and this is like an extra activity for them and promotes the bonding between the human and the animal. Same thing with dock diving. One of our behavior and training managers uses her dog in dock diving. So he was trained on how to catch the lure. They are judged on how much distance or height they get jumping off of the dock. So it's something that involves, once again, training and bonding between the human and the animal, and is a really fun sport to watch. Instead of horse racing or dressage or, any example where the horses aren't prioritized, but once again, some horseback riders and competitions do prioritize the horse, so you got to be careful. But therapeutic riding is a great way where you can spend time with a horse, have fun, and it's giving a benefit to someone who might have a mental or physical disability. Nose work is another fun thing that a lot of animals can do at home. You don't even have to make a true spectacle or event out of it, although there are specific nose work clubs and events, but the animal is trained to identify a specific type of scent. They're given a cue, and then they go directly to where that scent is, and usually there's a reward based on finding the correct scent marker. So very good stimulation for the dog, and another great way to promote the human-animal bond. There's another picture of agility training, since there's so many different objects on the course of agility. And you can, just do simple things at home. I recently bought a hula hoop for my cat, so I'll see if she wants to try some cat agility. But, it's all about getting creative and experimenting and learning what your animal likes. That's what I think is the most fun, is trying things out with them and exploring all these great ways where you both can have fun together. This is rally obedience. There are just regular obedience competitions, or rally, where you kind of go along a course and the signs tell you what commands you and your dog should perform. Recently, the Westminster Dog Show started allowing mixed breed dogs, and I think there are other mixed breed dog shows and mixed breed cat show events. So, I recommend checking those out. That can be fun just to show off people's pets and do something a little different. Once again, as long as the emphasis is on the love between all animals and all people, and the human animal bond. Visiting an AZA or established zoo or aquarium, or wildlife rehabilitators. So here's a picture of Willowbrook Wildlife. They rehabilitate wild animals. Or if you were looking for a more typical zoo experience, you can go to the Association of Zoos and Aquariums website, and they have a full list of all zoos and aquariums in the United States that are accredited and what the requirements are to become accredited. So they are a great resource if you're looking for somewhere to view wild animals, whether it be native to Illinois or wild animals from around the globe. I would definitely recommend researching what type of facility you'll be going to, because you want to definitely avoid those for-profit roadside zoos and wildlife parks. But there's lots of ways where we can happily enjoy viewing animals' abilities where they're displaying their natural talents. We're not forcing them to do anything they don't want to, and it's promoting the human animal bond for everybody involved. So while there are unfortunate activities out there and unfortunate people who do these things to animals, society has really changed the way it views animals in entertainment. I think we're slowly but surely making progress towards only humane options like this. So try to make good decisions and encourage others to only attend events that focus on the animal's well-being. So thank you guys so much for sitting through this very complicated topic. But like I said, there's definitely light at the end of the tunnel, and make sure that you give your animals lots of love and encourage others to do what's right for them as well. Thank you guys so